And welcome everyone. We're very excited to have you here today for another webinar by Accessiby. We'll soon begin with introductions, but for today's topic and the reason that you're all here is to talk about this trend that we're seeing with digital accessibility lawsuits in New York. Now, the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, is a law that you might be familiar with and we'll dive a little bit deeper into, but what we're seeing lately, especially last year, is a rise in digital accessibility lawsuits reaching 5,000 in 2025. So we have a very interesting conversation for you today. We're very excited to share some insights from our end and also hear your questions. So feel free to add those in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we'll be sure to answer those either throughout or at the end of the webinar. So to get started, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sapir Yarden. I am part of Accessiby's marketing department, have been with the organization for 4.5 years. So have seen a few different things about web accessibility in my time here. And what's been really interesting is seeing the balance between the compliance end and businesses really wanting to do good. So I think that's part of the conversation that we're going to be having today. And I'm really excited to welcome my friend and co-host Kelly, which I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Simino. I really enjoy doing webinars with Accessiby because I think these topics are so important and on trend right now. I am a lawyer. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I have a heart for looking at the things in the lens of disability based on my own personal experience. I was in a car wreck when I was 16 and sustained a spinal cord injury and have been wheeling through life since then. And so now in my own practice as a lawyer, I try to help guide people in many different areas, including those in the sphere of, what we need to know related to laws for people with disabilities. So happy to bring that insight to everyone today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly, and excited for us to have another conversation together. So for today's agenda, we're going to cover a few different topics. We'll first introduce what web accessibility is for those of you who might not be familiar or just want a little bit more data to bring back to your teams and to have those conversations internally. Kelly will help us cover the legal landscape and understanding all of the regulatory side of what is happening with web accessibility. Then we'll focus in on why New York. And we have some steps and guidance and information for you that you can already get started with. As mentioned, we'll have Q&A at the end, but feel free to add your questions already to the chat and Q&A function on Zoom as we go along. So let's get started. What is web accessibility? Feel free to add your comments in the chat itself if you have questions about if you have an idea about what web accessibility is. But to us, it's the practice of ensuring that people with disabilities, and it actually means everyone, but in particular, people with disabilities can effectively perceive, navigate, interact with, and contribute to content on your website. And even beyond your website, thinking about web portals, web apps, and any digital assets you might have that can contribute to equal use of accessing your business or the resources that you're providing. So being accessible really does mean opening your website, but in the US, the CDC has found that 1 in 4 people in the US or adults in the US has a disability. So that's 28% of the population in the US and 16% of the global population that has a disability. I found an interesting statistic recently also that between 70 to 80% of people with disabilities have an invisible disability, meaning that it's not seen to the eye. And that can also be something that is really important for you to have in these conversations around web accessibility. I definitely have been in conversations with web agencies or businesses that said, well, we don't have people with disabilities that shop on our website. And that just strictly isn't true. But also, we don't know what we don't know. And to have these conversations and to be open to learning about the process of web accessibility, testing your website and making sure that you're doing all of the best practices will help set you up not only for having an accessible and compliant website, but also for having a business that is doing all of the right things to achieve greater success. And we'll talk about those benefits in a moment. Another interesting comment that I want to share with you is that the disability community has massive spending power. So the Valuable 500, which is an organization based in the UK, has found that the community of people with disabilities has about $8 trillion in spending power. When they extrapolated that to the disability community's community, meaning also friends and family, that number then rose to $13 trillion. And when they researched what the losses were for businesses, they found that there was a $7 billion loss for businesses that don't make their websites accessible. One more piece of content that sort of reinforces that whole point is that when we did a research with another UK-based organization last year on called Open Inclusion, we found that 71% of customers with disabilities will leave a website that is not accessible. So if your website is not accessible, you are essentially losing out on that particular customer, that customer's community, and a lot of business. Kelly, any thoughts on that before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, as a person in the disability community, I know that it's a very brand loyal population. When you find, for me as a wheelchair user, if I know a restaurant's going to be accessible, I know what to expect. I know I'm not going to have any barriers I'm facing. I'm going to go back again and again. And the same holds true in our digital space. If we know we can go on, we can seamlessly operate, check that box, and accomplish what we want to do, we're going to be back again and again.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So, like we both said, accessibility is good for business. And at the top here, we have three benefits that what some businesses might call on the fluffier side, which it's not, because we're talking about real numbers that optimize your business and boost organic traffic. We've seen that with websites receiving up to 12% in organic reach when they have an accessible website, reaching new audiences, maybe customers that you haven't been able to reach before, and enhancing that brand reputation and customer loyalty. That translates into real money. But the reason that you're here today is to talk about the legal risk and the legal actions that are relevant for your business. So we'll jump into those in just a moment. I will also mention that last week we did a webinar about tax credits. So if you're having conversations internally or if you're interested in investing in web accessibility, there is a tax credit associated with this for specific stipulations. We can share the link in the chat later. Okay, Kelly, are you ready to jump into the legal landscape?
Yeah, let's go. So, as a starting point, I think, we all kind of come into this discussion thinking to what really was the monumental piece of legislation that surrounds really the access and rights of people with disabilities as we know it right now, and that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was enacted in 1990, so 35 years plus ago, and that was really the piece of legislation that made it so the prevention of discrimination to ensure equal access for people with disabilities. There's five different titles. Those titles really encompass different parts in our lives. The Title One is in the space of employment. Title Two is dealing with state and local government services. Title Three is public accommodations, and that's the one that we all probably in our minds think of the most when you're thinking of, again, for me as a wheelchair user, going into a store and having a ramp to get in. And then you have Title 4 and 5 going into different miscellaneous provisions as well as telecommunications. And all of these were built out and framed to address specific protections, requirements for people with disabilities in the US. But one thing I guess I will say is before I go into kind of where we are now with litigation is, 1990, our digital landscape looked very different than it did today, than it does today. And for that reason, the ADA did not specifically speak to websites. And so as websites became such an important aspect in all of our functioning in lives. I mean, I'm a business owner myself. I have business website. Um, the question was like, well, where do websites fit in? And the Department of Justice has come out and said that websites must be accessible under the ADA, under Title III of the ADA. Um, but when there was this kind of more gray area or people were not aware, what did we start seeing? Well, the disability community started filing lawsuits saying, hey, websites are important, the digital space is important, and if it's not accessible, we're gonna force, we need to change that so that we have that access. So when you're looking at what's happening now, you're seeing that there are many lawsuits being brought about against many different companies related to accessibility, digital accessibility. There have been over 5,000 ADA digital accessibility lawsuits that have been filed across federal and state courts. Um, a really particular note, and that's why the website today is framed in the way it is that the majority of these cases are being filed in New York. Also California has as a lot, but really, New York year to year has been the main place where these lawsuits have been filed. Um, and the trend is showing that it's going to continue to rise. Um, Federal filings have slightly dipped year over year, but those state courts filing in state courts in New York or California or Pennsylvania, those continue to rise, and it's led by New York. And what that shows is people care about this, that people want websites, digital spaces to be accessible, and that the enforcement of this is very stable, and it's a sustainable model, and it is not declining. Um, Oftentimes people are asking like, okay, like, well, I have a website, but am I going to be a target? It depends what your answer is to that question. But what we can show through data is that the e-commerce websites account for over 70% of all digital accessibility lawsuits. And just keep in mind, like when I'm talking about lawsuits are something that are filed in court. That doesn't even account for the many demand letters, the letters that are sent to businesses all the time, every day, saying, we've gone to your site, it's not accessible, we can't access it as we need to, and you are in violation of the law unless you fix it. But 70% of the cases filed in court do target e-commerce websites. After that, you see food service, like people wanting to put orders in, grocery stores, restaurants, and then all other industries combined account for less than 10% of the filings.
I'll add that specifically these two industries are also very transactional in nature. I mean, their websites are. So you're going to the website because you want to complete a purchase or you want to look through products. And if you're missing product information, or if someone can't navigate just with the use of a keyboard or whatever their assistive technology might be to get to that checkout function and leave their information, those are people who want to be customers, but they just aren't able to. And so when we're thinking about the checkout flow, the usability of your website, all of the buttons being able to be clicked, all of the product information being accurate or full, those are some of the elements that can help make your website more accessible. And those are things that you can also get started with looking at today. But let's continue.
So, why did we want to spend a whole webinar talking about New York? And that's because let's look at this chart. If we're looking at total ADA accessibility lawsuits in 2025, 2,742 of those happened in New York, and nowhere else was even close. Florida had 975, California 226, and New York is by far the single most active jurisdiction for ADA digital accessibility lawsuits in both state and in federal courts. Um, and and it's New York has the most state level filings. One thing many people think like is, well, I'm not in New York, so this means that I'm kind of that risk is not there for me. But in the digital space, it just doesn't work like that. There doesn't have to be a physical presence required. If you are serving New Yorkers, if you are serving the state of New York in its digital space, that is enough to establish jurisdiction. And so anyone across the US who touches the presence of people in New York, that is enough to then land you in litigation in New York.
And there's fewer than 10 law firms that are accounting for the majority of these lawsuits, and they have a system in place for filing through the New York state. So, again, it just reinforcing Kelly's point, and I think that's a really interesting one that you don't have to have a physical presence in New York in order to have any sort of legal risk with your website. Same goes also if there's any businesses here that operate with Europe. We're seeing this as a global trend where regulations are transcending borders. And if you are selling or purchasing from Europe, you still need to have an accessible website through the European Accessibility Act. So it goes without saying that this isn't just a New York issue. This is a national, global trend that we're seeing with web accessibility. And
Yeah, I
it's
mean, it's not really that it's a New York issue, it's a business owner issue. And if you're a business owner, you could kind of land yourself in a court in New York, is really what that means. So, you know, you can now that we've seen um, data points on these types of cases over a set of years, we can kind of analyze like, what's happening, where is it happening, perhaps why is it happening? Um, and 45% of the federal cases are targeting companies that have already had litigation brought against them, companies that have already been sued. And so, it's not enough to have that one-time remediation. It honestly is an ongoing living effort to maintain accessibility for websites because if a business makes their website accessible for a day and does nothing more to maintain it in that way, that is how we see the 45% of companies that had already been sued. It's that way to make sure that you're not maintaining in a moment in accessibility, but you're able to have your website at any time in an updated format, maintaining accessibility so that whenever someone needs to use a tool, they can operate your website and accomplish their goals. So, part of this is there's trends on things that are being looked at, so that serial enforcement. These aren't just one-offs, these are things that are being looked at over and over on a wide scale basis. These are, unfortunately, we need to have an accessible digital space, but the reality is that there are, certain uh, law firms that are actively monitoring and really putting their lens on companies that have been defendants before, looking to make sure that they can't, catch them in that next spot where they're not accessible. So that's why really when it comes to web accessibility, it has to be a goal that is implemented in for a long run and not just a partial kind of surface level fix one thing, because that's a exposure point in the future. So, what does this mean for businesses? Again, I'm a business owner myself. We have to mitigate those risks, and really like looking at New York sets that playbook of what is happening. We're looking at certain industries, e-commerce industries. We're looking at places where the traffic, like web traffic, user reach. We're not looking at where a company is located physically on the map. We're looking at what's their digital reach. Although, to be clear, you can be a small business and still have a significant risk if you're not if you don't maintain an accessible website. I mean, the types of cases that have been found go from very small businesses all the way up to the biggest ones you can think of, and no one is really going to be protected from those kinds of cases just because you only have a certain number of pages on your website or you're a certain size business. I mean, uh, every business owner with a digital presence needs to have this in mind. Um, it's really something that will continue to trend as more and more of these cases are filed, which means like this isn't like let's fix it and forget it. It's let's fix it and maintain it for now, now and into the future.
You bring up some really important points there. So, in the same way that maybe security and privacy and SSL certificates had been thought of as, we have to do this, and now they're just the cost of doing business, accessibility is getting to that same space because accessibility isn't just as we defined it before, it's not just about making sure that people with disabilities can access a website. It's about ensuring usability for everyone. And when we're thinking also about the cost of doing business. Um, if you are a larger organization and maybe you have several domains or subdomains or smaller affiliates that sit under you, all of those can also be sued. Meaning they don't have to go to your main marketing site only for a web accessibility lawsuit. So you need to think about this as an ongoing operational practice for your business and not just a one-time thing that is done, but rather a part of the future of work for your digital assets. So I think this slide is for me, and this is what businesses should do now. Meaning, okay, we've given you a lot of context into the disability community. We've given the spending power. We've given you context into what web accessibility is and the benefits of actually taking an action, and also the background on the legal space. But for you, you might be thinking, okay, I want to walk away from this webinar with something concrete. What are my next steps? So first, I think we really appreciate a business that will do an audit and just review, okay, what are my digital assets? Where do I need to, because it can be overwhelming when you want to get started. So first, having an overview of all of your digital assets and be able to start scanning them either with automated tools like the ones that we have at Accessibility, or also with a manual test, which we can also discuss. And that will help you uncover the initial barriers. Once you start remediating those barriers, you can prioritize them as well. We can help with that. So you can fix structural accessibility issues at the code level. So that is an alternative solution as well. As we mentioned, implementing ongoing monitoring so that you can catch any risks. I can say from personal experience that in previous roles, I was responsible, not at Accessibility, but I was responsible for managing websites. And I am not a web developer. So I had very little technical background, and the changes that I was making were actually, once I came to this company, I had learned were making the website the least accessible version of what it could have been. And they were very small things that aesthetically made sense to me, but they're just generally not good usability or accessibility practices. And I think when you're able to sort of limit and teach that knowledge to the core users of your website, and you're not, maybe you have an e-commerce website that you're updating on the regular, making sure that everyone is reviewing the same sort of accessibility logic and has the same tools to be able to make those updates without interfering with the accessibility level. And then finally, and this might be one of the more important elements of what you should be doing, is as soon as you get started, start documenting your efforts, making sure that you're able to demonstrate good faith compliance. And I'll explain why in a moment, which is that last year, a US court affirmed Access Widget's role in compliance. So we worked with a doctor whose office was based in New York, and he received a lawsuit. The judge was able to then look at the Access Widget solution, which also provides monthly remediation reports, as well as an audit of the website, and said that the site's use of an accessibility widget was sufficient to assure the court there is no reasonable expectation that the accessibility issues purportedly identified by the plaintiff will recur. So kudos to that business for taking action and reviewing and also involving an agency that was able to address this. And it just goes to show that the litigation support that Accessibility was able to offer, which we'll talk about momentarily, was also very beneficial and helpful in closing this case. So as mentioned, web accessibility doesn't have to be overwhelming. We're here to help simplify it. Feel free to reach out to us either on the chat now or through our website. We do have several different approaches for getting started with web accessibility. The first and the one that you might be most familiar with is our Access widget, which is an AI-powered solution and interface that allows users to make modifications to the website as needed for their personal experience. Access Flow is a developer tool. So it is actually a platform that can integrate with different ticketing platforms that your developers might already be using to help them identify, with the help of AI, code level remediations that they can automate fix. And I think it's just a phenomenal solution for anyone who's working on code level accessibility. And then finally, we do have a professional services team that can support you with audits, user testing, file remediation if you have documents and PDFs that need to be accessible. And they also do other testing as well. So we're by your side with any solution that you think might fit for your business, whether you're starting out small and growing from there, or also looking to identify the best solution to help integrate this web accessibility practice into your business. We do offer litigation support, and this will come with a dedicated case manager who will walk you through the entire legal process in the unfortunate event that something does happen. You can receive inspections of your website. You'll have access to a top ADA attorney in the event that we reach that point. You'll receive all of the professional documentation that you need to prove and verify your accessibility efforts. And in the event that something happens, there is a 15K pledge. So we do have a lot of support. And in a research that we did last year, we found that 80% of e-commerce businesses, and remember that 70% of that 70% of the ADA cases are targeting e-commerce. So we did a research with e-commerce leaders and found that 80% really want litigation support. And this is something that we're already offering to our clients, and have the proven record to show it. So that being said, we're just about at the top of the hour, and I wanted to ask Kelly a few questions while we're still here. But if anyone has questions that they want to ask, feel free to add them in the chat. Kelly, thank you for joining us.
Mhm.
What do you think is the most important thing that people should walk away from today's webinar with?
Well, I mean, I think as business owners, I think the main thing is that there are easily obtainable tools to mitigate risk. Um, Going back and having a situation where you receive a demand letter and then you're having to roll it back from there, it becomes very costly. It could even end up being not even a demand, but you're in litigation and then you're trying to remediate, you're trying to have your website become accessible. And that money is going to be a lot to pay attorneys' fees, and ultimately get your website accessible where it could have been in the beginning. And so I think that the takeaway is always don't wait until the risk is in your mailbox, is in your email. Like, do it now because one, it's the right thing to do. It's going to open opportunities for your business for more people to have access to it, but also it mitigates that very real risk and growing risk.
Mhm. I think that's such a good point. I've had conversations with business owners who said, well, if it happens to me, I'll just pay the settlement fee or we'll deal with it when we cross that bridge. But they don't realize that the benefit is also that by investing in your website's accessibility, you're improving also the ability to reach more customers, that you're reducing the risk. So that's already an investment down, that you have support from the provider that you choose to work with. And so it basically pays for itself, and it's a good thing to do for any business. So those are my takes on that. Um, do you think the size of a website matters for a web accessibility lawsuit to happen or a demand letter?
No, I mean, I think we can track the types of cases that have been filed, and I might have touched on this a little bit. I mean, certainly we've seen very large companies like addressing this issue head on and really not coming out ahead, but certainly, small businesses. And that is oftentimes um, where people have eyes on, looking for those small businesses that they may have like a very particular product that they may not think they could get somewhere else. But the size of the business is not of consequence to what this could mean from a legal perspective, and the size of the website does not matter as well. The courts have not said that you have to have this many employees or this many pages on your website to then have the ADA apply.
And also they don't have to necessarily, and the location doesn't matter, meaning you also don't have to be based in New York. The law still can, or you can still be targeted for a lawsuit in any other state.
Right, because, the goal is probably that you want to have customers that can reach you from every state and everywhere. And that's kind of the underlying basis of how so many of these cases are being brought in New York is that, there's an argument to be made that a person in New York is trying to access the website and cannot.
Yeah. We have a question from Anne, which is a very good question because she says accessibility can be complex. Is there a guide for what should be the minimum level of compliance?
Well, I know that you talk a lot about this when you talk to your customers, but there are certain levels of standards that have been developed over time. It's called the WCAG or the WCAG, and there's different levels of it. Certainly, there's a floor, but there's always room for improvement. And so those standards are those are like really the technical standards that a website should be adhering to in order to say we've put our best efforts in to make sure this website is accessible.
Absolutely. And so with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG, as you called it, there are three levels, the single A, double A, and triple A. And the triple A is sort of the ideal, but very difficult to reach or maintain. So the courts have set a standard of reaching the double A level, which is the level that Accessibility does achieves or adheres to. So WCAG 2.2 at the double A level, that is the current standard.
And
And
it's moving. Like, what was at 2.0 is now at 2.2. And so, being connected in with services that keep up to date, that know this, that just it's nothing you're having to think of, or where are we with the WCAG now? What do I need? All of that is just kind of seamlessly built into the product. I mean, that, you know, for all of us that we want to worry about other things part of our business, not the technical standards and whether we're reaching that.
absolutely. And so Access Widget does help you achieve or adhere to that level of compliance. And for more information on the levels of compliance, you can definitely visit our website. We do have a lot of content around that, and I'd be happy to follow up and share some more resources with you to make sure that you have your question answered. We have one more question from Madeline. Our primary goal is ensuring full ADA compliance and minimizing legal risk while also creating a genuinely accessible experience. First of all, kudos to you. The question is, does the Access widget alone provide legal protections and meet ADA guidelines, or are code level adjustments still required? Kelly, do you want me to take this or?
Yeah, and I can
Okay.
pop in as needed, but I know you on the access one.
So it's a really interesting question and it's worded very well because the ADA actually doesn't provide the specific guidelines on how to make a website accessible. As Kelly mentioned earlier, the ADA was written in 1990, long before we started using digital assets in the way that we're using them today. I don't think the people who wrote the ADA were expecting LLMs to come into existence so soon. So The ADA and courts around the world actually reflect back to the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that we were just speaking about. And that's also how our solution adheres to the requirements or the guidelines that are necessary for an accessible website. We also have a team here at Accessibility that does professional testing for us, as well as a group that works directly with our product and engineering department. They're called Access Labs. They're a team of 9 blind usability testers that go line by line and make sure that our solutions are working with their assistive technologies and are best in class. So the Access widget alone, if you are purchasing a scale or above license, you will have access to the litigation support package and the 15K pledge. Um, uh, and then in terms of meeting the guidelines, those will be addressed in your accessibility statement or also by working with Access Flow so that you can actually monitor line by line all of the different areas in which you can make adjustments at the source level of your website. We have one more question from Tim. Does Accessibility provide AI agents that can be set to auto for protective code correction during development? Yes, Tim. We have a webinar that I will share with you about Access Flow and our MCP, so the co-pilot for monitoring accessibility at the source code level. So I'll be sure to share that information over with you, and we'd be happy to set up the demo. I'll give a last chance for any other questions. And Kelly, is there anything that I missed out on?
No, going back to Madeline's question, some things I think that have come up is more maybe not so much on code level adjustments, but also just like captioning. And I know that Accessibility has been doing a lot more to make sure that if you have a video on your website, that it's captioned, it's labeled appropriately, as that's also an aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And it's coming into wider conversation today with ADA Title II, because if you're receiving any public funding from state and local government, or if you're planning on working with state and local government, then you're expected to have you're expected to be accessible as well, but they're also looking at the digital files and assets on your website, like PDFs, documents, videos. And basically, it's just a good practice to have all of these resources be accessible so that everyone can reach them.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. And to everyone who was on the webinar, thank you for your active listening and participation. We really appreciate it. And we'll be sure to follow up, but we hope to hear from you soon and connect about web accessibility and how we can work together. Have a good one, everyone.